My name is Violet, and I came into this world as an afterthought, a child born to parents who had long moved past the idea of raising another baby. By the time I arrived, my mother and father were already in their 40s, settled in their ways and entirely content with their lives as they were. They had Sarah, their 10-year-old daughter, and to them, she was more than enough. "We didn't plan for you," my mother would say, not cruelly, not with anger, but with the same detached matter-of-factness as if commenting on the weather. And then, sometimes, she'd pause, her lips pressing together as if holding back the rest of the thought. "If it wasn't for your grandparents' insistence..." She never finished the sentence, but the meaning was painfully clear. I wasn't here because my parents had wanted another child. I was here because my maternal grandparents had convinced them that another baby, a second granddaughter, would bring joy to the family. And while my grandparents were indeed overjoyed by my arrival, my parents saw me as an obligation, one they had neither anticipated nor desired. By the time I was old enough to understand my place in the family, Sarah was already deeply immersed in her own world, consumed by teenage concerns. She wasn't mean to me. She simply acted as though I didn't exist. While I played with my dolls on the floor of our shared living room, she would be sprawled on the couch, twisting the phone cord around her fingers as she talked endlessly about boys, exams, and college applications. "Sarah, honey, don't forget your SAT prep books," my mother would remind her, carefully tucking them into her backpack, ensuring her future was set on the right path. Meanwhile, I sat quietly at the kitchen table, staring at my math homework, hoping, just once, someone would notice I needed help too. But the help never came. Instead, my parents established a routine that would define my childhood. Each morning, they dropped me off at my grandparents' house without fail. "You wanted her," my father would say to my grandfather, his car keys jingling in his palm as he prepared to leave for work. "She's all yours." And so, my grandparents' home became my real home. They picked me up from school, helped me with my homework, took me to the park, and ensured I was well fed and cared for. Only at night did my parents return to retrieve me, often looking tired, often seeming annoyed at the inconvenience of it all. But my grandmother's arms were always open as she hugged me tightly before I left. "You're the best thing that ever happened to us, Violet," she would whisper, her warmth wrapping around me like a safety net. And for a brief, fleeting moment, I could almost forget that I was unwanted elsewhere. This pattern repeated day after day, year after year. While Sarah prepared for her bright future, I learned to navigate life as an afterthought in my own home. Yet, through it all, my grandparents' love remained constant, unwavering. It was in their house that I learned what it meant to be truly valued. "Someday," my grandfather said as we worked on my math homework, "you'll understand that sometimes the best things in life aren't planned." He winked at me, and for a moment, the heavy weight of being unwanted lifted from my small shoulders. When Sarah left for college, I dared to hope things might change. Maybe now, in her absence, my parents would finally see me, the daughter who remained. But I couldn't have been more wrong. "Violet!" My mother's voice reached me before I had even set my backpack down after school. "The house needs cleaning. Start with the bathrooms." What had once been Sarah's chores were now mine. The responsibilities piled up swiftly. Laundry, vacuuming, dusting. The washing machine became my closest companion, its hum filling the silence as I worked tirelessly. I memorized every cycle, every setting, learning its quirks as if it were a living thing. The housework seemed endless. "You live here. You need to contribute," my father would say if I hesitated for even a second. "Your sister always did her part." By the time I turned 14, my duties expanded from cleaning to cooking. It wasn't a gradual shift. One day, my mother simply stopped making dinner. "You're old enough now," she announced over breakfast, barely looking up from her coffee. "We expect dinner ready when we get home." That first night, I made spaghetti. It was overcooked, the noodles soft and swollen, but edible. My parents ate in silence, barely acknowledging my effort. Then, without glancing up from his plate, my father spoke. "Tomorrow, try something with chicken." It wasn't a suggestion. Every night, after finishing the dishes, I would retreat to my room, my only solace found in the flickering screen of my laptop as I browsed university websites, dreaming of escape. College became my beacon of hope, the only thing that kept me going. One day, I promised myself I would leave too. I would carve out a life where I was not an afterthought, but someone who mattered. Because if there was one thing I had learned, it was this: love should never feel like an accident. And one day, I would make sure that mine didn't. Websites became my escape. I'd imagine myself strolling through the sprawling campuses of distant universities, far away from the endless cycle of chores and suffocating silences that filled my home. College was my dream, my only ticket out. But then, when I was 16, Sarah came home with news that would change everything. One Sunday afternoon, she burst through the front door, practically glowing, dragging a tall, well-dressed man behind her. "Mom, Dad," she squealed, her eyes shining with excitement. "This is James. We're engaged." It was as if she had just announced she had won the lottery. My parents leapt from their seats, my mother bursting into happy tears, my father already pulling out his phone to call relatives. "We'll pay for everything," my mother declared, embracing Sarah tightly. "Our first daughter's wedding has to be perfect." From that moment on, wedding preparations consumed our house. Every conversation revolved around venues, floral arrangements, and extravagant guest lists. Money, which had always seemed scarce when it came to me, now flowed like water. A designer dress, premium vendors, a top-tier venue, nothing was too expensive for Sarah's big day. My grandparents attended the wedding, but I could see the discomfort on their faces. My grandmother frowned at the elaborate ice sculpture, which probably cost more than a semester of college tuition. My grandfather merely shook his head at the champagne fountain, but they kept their thoughts to themselves. 2 years later, I found myself sitting at our dinner table, 3 college acceptance letters spread before me. After years of balancing relentless household chores with maintaining straight A's, I had done it. I had been accepted into all my top choices. My heart pounded as I took a deep breath and told my parents the news. "That's nice," my mother said, not even glancing up from her plate. "But we can't pay for it." The words hit me like a physical blow. "We spent all our savings on your sister's wedding. We even took out a loan for it. There's nothing left for college." I blinked, struggling to process what she had just said. "But you paid for Sarah's college," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "That was different," my mother replied, her tone dismissive. "We saw potential in her." The silence that followed was deafening. I sat frozen, the acceptance letters suddenly feeling unbearably heavy in my hands. My parents, meanwhile, continued eating as if they hadn't just crushed my dreams in a single sentence. "You should get a job," my father said between bites. "Save up some money? Take out a student loan. That's what responsible adults do." Something inside me snapped. I pushed back my chair and left the table without asking to be excused, something I had never dared to do before. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and dialed my grandmother's number. Within minutes, I was walking through my grandparents' familiar front door, tears streaming down my face. "Oh, sweetheart," my grandmother murmured as she pulled me into a warm embrace. Between sobs, I told them everything. About the rejection, the dismissal, the cold indifference. As I spoke, my grandfather's face grew stern, but there was something else in his eyes. Something I couldn't quite place. When I finally finished, they exchanged a knowing look. "Violet," my grandfather said, reaching for my hand. "We've been expecting something like this." "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. My grandmother sighed. "We've watched how they treated you all these years. How they poured money into Sarah's education, into her wedding. We knew there was a chance they would do the same to you." Without another word, my grandfather stood up and walked to his study. When he returned, he was holding a folder. He sat down, opened it, and spread out bank statements in front of me. "We've been saving for your education since the day you were born," he said. "You can choose any of those 3 colleges. We've got you covered." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Relief, gratitude, and an overwhelming sense of love washed over me all at once. That night, I returned home and quietly packed my things. Not everything, just what I needed. My parents were watching TV downstairs when I walked past them with my bags. "I'm moving in with Grandma and Grandpa," I said simply. My mother barely looked up. "Whatever you think is best," she replied, her eyes never leaving the screen. Was that relief in her voice? The next few weeks passed in a blur of college preparations. My grandparents helped me with every detail, from filling out forms to buying supplies. And when I finally stepped onto my college campus that fall, it felt like I was stepping into a brand new world. One where, for the first time, I wasn't an afterthought. I was finally free. A whole new world had opened up to me. The coursework was challenging, demanding even, but I loved every single moment of it. Each lecture, every late-night study session, and every exam felt like a step away from my past and toward a future I had built for myself. My professors quickly noticed my dedication, and before long, I found myself staying after class, engaging in deep discussions about intricate financial theories. For the first time in my life, someone besides my grandparents recognized my potential. Real, undeniable potential. By my second year, I was thriving when one of my weekly phone calls with my grandmother brought unexpected news about Sarah. "Your sister is having trouble," she said, her voice carrying a mix of concern and inevitability. "Her marketing career isn't taking off the way she hoped, and James, well, he can't seem to hold down a job. They're constantly asking your parents for money." I wasn't surprised when she told me they were getting it. "Your mother emptied her retirement account last month just to help them pay rent." My grandmother sighed. "They just can't say no to her." A year later, things took a turn for the worse. Sarah and James could no longer afford rent, even with my parents' continued financial support. With nowhere else to go, they moved back home, into my old bedroom. The same room I had spent years keeping spotless, ensuring every corner was perfectly arranged only for them to claim it as their own. The irony was bitter. Meanwhile, my own life was taking shape in ways I had once only dreamed of. My professors, recognizing my aptitude, helped me secure prestigious internships at top financial firms. I quickly discovered that I had a natural talent for unraveling complex financial puzzles, a skill that set me apart. Each challenge, each project only reinforced that I had chosen the right path. "You've got an instinct for this," my supervisor at Morgan Stanley told me during my performance review. "We'd love to have you back next summer." I threw myself into my studies and work, distancing myself from my family, except for the calls with my grandparents. But during my senior year, when I went to visit them, I knew the moment I stepped through their door that something was wrong. My grandmother's usual warm smile was there, but it didn't reach her eyes. My grandfather, always quick with a joke, sat silently in his armchair, staring at nothing in particular. The air in the house felt heavy, thick with unspoken words. "What's wrong?" I asked over dinner, watching them absent-mindedly push their food around their plates. "And don't tell me it's nothing. I know you both too well." They exchanged a look, one I had seen many times before, the kind that meant they were trying to protect me from something. Finally, my grandfather exhaled deeply and spoke. "Your parents came to see us last week." His voice was unusually tired. "They wanted their inheritance early." I set my fork down slowly. "What do you mean?" My grandmother hesitated before answering. "They're in trouble with the banks. Multiple loans, credit card debt. They said they needed $200,000 to avoid bankruptcy." A cold realization settled in my chest. "And you gave it to them?" I asked, my voice tight with barely restrained anger. My grandfather nodded. "We had to, Violet. They're still our daughter and son-in-law, despite everything. It was most of our savings." "Most of your savings?" I echoed, my voice rising. "After everything they've done? After how they've enabled Sarah's reckless behavior? After how they treated me?" My grandmother reached across the table, her eyes filled with sorrow as she took my hand. "We know you're angry, sweetheart, but what's done is done. We'll be fine." But I wasn't fine. I was furious. The same parents who claimed they had no money for my education had drained my grandparents' savings to bail out Sarah and James. Again. The same parents who had treated me like a servant in my own home had the audacity to demand money from the only people who had ever truly loved me. And why? Because they couldn't say no to Sarah. Because they had never learned to manage their own finances. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Some things never changed. A week after we laid my grandmother to rest, we gathered in a wood-paneled office for the reading of the will. I sat across from my parents, with Sarah and James slouched in chairs beside them. The room smelled of old paper and furniture polish, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mr. Patterson, the notary, adjusted his glasses and began reading in a monotone voice. I expected the usual legal jargon, but what came next made everyone sit up straight. To our beloved granddaughter Violet, he read, "We leave our house at 1542 Maple Street, and the sum of $150,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's mouth fell open, my mother gripped my father's arm so hard her knuckles turned white. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat and continued. And a personal note from Mr. Henderson to his daughter, Margaret. He looked at my mother. The note reads, "Margaret, remember that we gave you $200,000 when you needed it most. This is our final decision, and we trust you will respect it, as we respected your needs then." My mother's face flushed red, then turned pale. My father stared at the floor, while Sarah and James exchanged worried glances. After the notary finished reading and began gathering his papers, my parents approached me in the parking lot. The composed demeanor they had shown during the funeral arrangements was gone, replaced by something almost desperate. "Violet, honey," my mother began, her voice trembling. "You have to understand. We always thought we'd inherit the house. We were counting on it. We're struggling," my father added, running a hand through his graying hair. "The mortgage, Sarah's family's expenses. We could really use the house." I looked at them both, remembering all the years of neglect, all the constant reminders that I wasn't wanted, all the refusals to help with my education. "No," I said firmly. "The house is mine. That's what Graham and Grandpa wanted." They continued pleading, following me to my car. Sarah joined in too, talking about how her boys needed a yard to play in. But I simply got in my car and drove away. A week later, my phone rang. It was my mother inviting me to dinner. Something in her voice sounded different. Humbled, perhaps. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Pulling up to my childhood home was like stepping back in time. Except everything looked shabbier than I remembered. The paint was peeling, the gutters sagged, and the once pristine lawn was patchy and overgrown. Inside, the house was crowded but clean. Sarah's twins, Tommy and Jake, ran circles around the living room while James half-heartedly told them to settle down. The boys were cute. They had Sarah's eyes and James's curly hair. "Violet!" My mother greeted me with a nervous smile, pulling me into an awkward hug. "We made your favorite pot roast." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Some things never changed. A week after we laid my grandmother to rest, we gathered in a wood-paneled office for the reading of the will. I sat across from my parents, with Sarah and James slouched in chairs beside them. The room smelled of old paper and furniture polish, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mr. Patterson, the notary, adjusted his glasses and began reading in a monotone voice. I expected the usual legal jargon, but what came next made everyone sit up straight. To our beloved granddaughter Violet, he read, "We leave our house at 1542 Maple Street, and the sum of $150,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's mouth fell open, my mother gripped my father's arm so hard her knuckles turned white. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat and continued. And a personal note from Mr. Henderson to his daughter, Margaret. He looked at my mother. The note reads, "Margaret, remember that we gave you $200,000 when you needed it most. This is our final decision, and we trust you will respect it, as we respected your needs then." My mother's face flushed red, then turned pale. My father stared at the floor, while Sarah and James exchanged worried glances. After the notary finished reading and began gathering his papers, my parents approached me in the parking lot. The composed demeanor they had shown during the funeral arrangements was gone, replaced by something almost desperate. "Violet, honey," my mother began, her voice trembling. "You have to understand. We always thought we'd inherit the house. We were counting on it. We're struggling," my father added, running a hand through his graying hair. "The mortgage, Sarah's family's expenses. We could really use the house." I looked at them both, remembering all the years of neglect, all the constant reminders that I wasn't wanted, all the refusals to help with my education. "No," I said firmly. "The house is mine. That's what Grandma and Grandpa wanted." They continued pleading, following me to my car. Sarah joined in too, talking about how her boys needed a yard to play in. But I simply got in my car and drove away. A week later, my phone rang. It was my mother inviting me to dinner. Something in her voice sounded different. Humbled, perhaps. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Pulling up to my childhood home was like stepping back in time. Except everything looked shabbier than I remembered. The paint was peeling, the gutters sagged, and the once pristine lawn was patchy and overgrown. Inside, the house was crowded but clean. Sarah's twins, Tommy and Jake, ran circles around the living room while James half-heartedly told them to settle down. The boys were cute. They had Sarah's eyes and James's curly hair. "Violet!" My mother greeted me with a nervous smile, pulling me into an awkward hug. "We made your favorite pot roast." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Some things never changed. A week after we laid my grandmother to rest, we gathered in a wood-paneled office for the reading of the will. I sat across from my parents, with Sarah and James slouched in chairs beside them. The room smelled of old paper and furniture polish, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mr. Patterson, the notary, adjusted his glasses and began reading in a monotone voice. I expected the usual legal jargon, but what came next made everyone sit up straight. "To our beloved granddaughter Violet," he read, "we leave our house at 1542 Maple Street, and the sum of $150,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's mouth fell open, my mother gripped my father's arm so hard her knuckles turned white. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat and continued. "And a personal note from Mr. Henderson to his daughter, Margaret." He looked at my mother. The note reads, "Margaret, remember that we gave you $200,000 when you needed it most. This is our final decision, and we trust you will respect it, as we respected your needs then." My mother's face flushed red, then turned pale. My father stared at the floor, while Sarah and James exchanged worried glances. After the notary finished reading and began gathering his papers, my parents approached me in the parking lot. The composed demeanor they had shown during the funeral arrangements was gone, replaced by something almost desperate. "Violet, honey," my mother began, her voice trembling. "You have to understand. We always thought we'd inherit the house. We were counting on it. We're struggling," my father added, running a hand through his graying hair. "The mortgage, Sarah's family's expenses. We could really use the house." I looked at them both, remembering all the years of neglect, all the constant reminders that I wasn't wanted, all the refusals to help with my education. "No," I said firmly. "The house is mine. That's what Grandma and Grandpa wanted." They continued pleading, following me to my car. Sarah joined in too, talking about how her boys needed a yard to play in. But I simply got in my car and drove away. A week later, my phone rang. It was my mother inviting me to dinner. Something in her voice sounded different. Humbled, perhaps. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Pulling up to my childhood home was like stepping back in time. Except everything looked shabbier than I remembered. The paint was peeling, the gutters sagged, and the once pristine lawn was patchy and overgrown. Inside, the house was crowded but clean. Sarah's twins, Tommy and Jake, ran circles around the living room while James half-heartedly told them to settle down. The boys were cute. They had Sarah's eyes and James's curly hair. "Violet!" My mother greeted me with a nervous smile, pulling me into an awkward hug. "We made your favorite pot roast." "That's not my favorite," I said automatically. "That's Sarah's favorite." An uncomfortable silence followed, broken only when my father cleared his throat. "Well, why don't you tell us what your favorite food is?" he asked hesitantly. "We'd love to know." And surprisingly, they seemed genuinely interested. Over dinner, they asked about my job, my apartment, my hobbies. For the first time, they actually listened when I talked about my work in finance, though I could tell most of it went over their heads. That dinner led to another, then another. Soon I was joining them for holidays, bringing gifts for the twins, even helping Sarah with their homework. Sometimes, when they mentioned the house needed repairs, I found myself offering to help. I paid for a new roof, fixed the heating system, repainted the exterior. Each time I wrote a check, my parents would tear up with gratitude. "You're too good to us," my mother would say, hugging me. "We don't deserve this." "You're right," I would think, but never say aloud, because despite everything, despite all the years of hurt and neglect, some small part of me still wanted to believe that people could change. The years passed, and my career continued to flourish. Each promotion brought new opportunities, and my investment portfolio grew substantially. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents seemed to strengthen. They were getting older, both over 70 now, and I found myself wanting to do something meaningful for them. "I've been thinking," I said during one of our Sunday dinners, watching my father struggle to rise from his chair. "This house isn't really suitable for you anymore. I want to buy you a new home. Something single-story with a nice garden, but easier to maintain. Something comfortable for your retirement years." Their reaction surprised me. Actual tears of joy. We spent the next few weeks house hunting together, and finally we found the perfect place. A beautiful ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood, with wide doorways and no stairs. Ideal for their needs. After signing the mortgage papers, I watched as my parents buzzed with excitement. They couldn't stop talking about how wonderful it all was. "We need to have a proper housewarming party," my father declared. "Let us arrange everything. It's the least we can do." "That would be lovely," I agreed, already planning to surprise them by presenting them with the deed during the celebration. "Just let me know when." Weeks passed. I was busy with work but kept expecting an invitation. When nothing came, I started asking about the date. "Oh, we're still planning," my mother would say dismissively. "You know how these things take time." "We want it to be perfect," my father would add. "We'll let you know soon." Something about their vague responses unsettled me. One evening, after yet another deflecting phone call from my mother, I found myself typing Sarah's name into Facebook. We hadn't connected in years. When her profile loaded, I saw it immediately. A post, just hours old. "So excited for Mom and Dad's housewarming party this Saturday. The house is gorgeous. Can't wait to celebrate with everyone." My breath caught. The post had dozens of comments from relatives and friends, all confirming their attendance. Photos showed decorations being set up, caterers being booked. This wasn't some last-minute gathering. This had been planned for weeks. My hand shaking slightly, I called my mother. "Hi, Mom," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Just checking in about the housewarming party. Have you set a date yet?" "Oh, honey, not yet," she replied smoothly. "Probably in a couple of weeks. We're still working out the details. We want everyone to be able to come." Everyone except me, apparently. That Saturday, I parked my car a block away from the house I bought. Music and laughter drifted through the evening air. Through the large front windows, I could see dozens of guests milling about. Relatives I recognized, friends of my parents, Sarah's social circle. The front door was unlocked, of course. They were expecting everyone. Everyone but the person who actually owned the house. I stepped inside quietly, following the sound of my father's voice into the living room. "And after all these years of hard work, we finally did it," he was saying, surrounded by a group of admiring listeners. "We bought our dream home. And don't forget about Sarah," my mother added proudly. "She helped so much with the down payment. Such a wonderful daughter, always taking care of her parents. Unlike some people," someone muttered. "Yes," my mother continued, her voice turning sharp. "You know, our younger daughter hasn't helped us at all, probably too busy with her career to care about family." Heat rose to my face as I took in the performance before me. Sarah beamed beside them, her 7-year-old twins running between the guests. "In the house I bought." "Actually," I said loudly, making everyone jump, "I think you've got that backwards." The color drained from my parents' faces. Guests turned to stare, whispers rippling through the crowd. "Violet!" My father recovered first, his smile tight. "What a surprise!" "I'm sure it is," I replied coolly, stepping further into the room. "Especially since you forgot to invite me to the housewarming party for the house I bought." Dead silence fell. Sarah's husband suddenly became very interested in his shoes. "Well," my mother said, her voice forced, "what's done is done. You bought it, yes, but it's ours now. You can't expect eternal gratitude." "That's right," my father added, regaining confidence. "And frankly, you're not welcome here. This is a family gathering." "And Sarah and her family will be living here too," my mother announced triumphantly. "They've already sold their house. It's all arranged." I couldn't help but laugh, a cold, harsh sound that made several guests shift uncomfortably. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out a folder. "You seem to be confused about something," I said, opening it to reveal the deed and ownership papers. "This house belongs to me. I never signed it over to you. In fact, I was planning to give it to you tonight at what I thought would be a proper housewarming party." My mother's face went from pale to ashen. My father started to sputter. I turned to address the stunned guests. "Now, I'd like everyone to leave. This is my house, and the party's over." "You can't do this," my mother shrieked. "We're your parents." "No," I said quietly, my voice steady. "You're just the people who gave birth to me. My real parents, my grandparents, taught me that family means more than blood. They also taught me about finances, which is why I own this house. And you don't." One by one, they left. My parents, Sarah, James, the twins, and all their guests. I stood on the front porch and watched as they drove away, disappearing into the night. A few weeks later, I learned that they had used the money from selling their house to buy an apartment. Sarah, James, and the twins moved in with them. They tried calling me for weeks, leaving voicemails, sending emails, reaching out on social media. I blocked them all. A month later, I sold the house and put the money into my account. One day, I would have my own children. And I promised myself this: they would never have to earn my love. They would never have to compete for my attention. Unlike my parents, I would love them equally, unconditionally, the way my grandparents loved me. If there is one thing my life has taught me, it is that love should never feel like an accident. I was born into a family that never truly wanted me, and for years I struggled to understand why I wasn't enough. I spent my childhood yearning for acceptance, my teenage years longing for escape, and my early adulthood proving that I was worthy of success and respect. But in the end, the most important lesson I learned is this: family is not defined by blood, but by love, by actions, and by the people who choose to stand by you no matter what. My grandparents showed me what it meant to be truly valued. They gave me a home, not just in a physical sense, but in their hearts. They taught me about kindness, about perseverance, and about the importance of standing up for myself. They proved that love is not something you have to earn. It is something freely given, without conditions or expectations. To anyone who has ever felt like an afterthought, like they had to fight for a place in their own family, know this: you are not defined by how others see you. You are not bound by their failures or their indifference. You have the power to shape your own future, to build a life where you are seen, heard, and respected. I learned that financial independence is freedom. The moment I took control of my own destiny, the moment I worked hard to secure my future, was the moment I became untouchable. Money doesn't buy happiness, but it does buy choices. It allows you to walk away from toxic relationships, to set boundaries, and to decide what kind of life you want to live. And to those who have ever been told they are not enough, let me tell you now, you are enough. You always were. Don't waste your energy trying to prove your worth to those who refuse to see it. Instead, focus on those who do. Find your own path, and when you do, walk it with confidence. One day, I will have my own children. And I promise they will never have to question my love. They will never have to earn it. They will never have to compete for my attention. Because I know now that true love, real, unconditional love, is the greatest gift a person can give. And I will give it freely just as my grandparents gave it to me.